I want to jump into this next installment of Unstuck, and here's just kind of the deal. We got to get right after this because we're gonna dive into some things that I just know are going to be helpful for us today. But God's going to put some just tools and resources and understanding into our hands, into our hearts, into our minds that will help us and provide ways forward for us for years to come. If you're a note taker, today's the day you just got to sketch some things down. We won't capture it all in one moment, so grab a phone, or if you're a journal or whatever and you brought that with you, or if you write in your Bible, whatever it is, just go ahead and be ready for that. And because here's kind of where we're at. We're just trying to help each other understand, like, look, there come moments in life where we get stuck, where it just feels like our life is in the middle of a really bad snowstorm, and we've kind of gone into the ditch, and sometimes we're not sure why we're in the ditch, and sometimes it's very clear, but it doesn't matter which way we seem to turn the wheel or how much we seem to push on the gas. It doesn't really matter what we seem to be attempting to do. We're just still stuck. We're in the same ditch, and we don't want to be, but we just are. And maybe sometimes it feels like we're kind of getting out, but then we're not really all the way out. We're not all the way out of the rut, and so then we're right back in, and we're staring at the same open field or the same trees or whatever, and we're watching everybody else go by, right? And that's the really disheartening thing. Like, everybody else is still traveling down the road of life, and it seems to be working, and we don't really know what's going on in their car, but it looks like it's working, and so that adds like salt to the wound for us of what we're in, right? Even though they have their own problems, and they might be stuck 100 yards down the road, or they might have just been stuck a mile back for like 2 years. But we just see this comparison trap we fall into. And the question really is, how do we get like unstuck? How do we get up out of the ditch and back on the road with some forward movement inside of our relationships, inside of our relationship with God, and just our vibrancy with Him? How do we get unstuck financially? How do we get unstuck in our career and how we're viewing that and how we're feeling about it? How do we get unstuck in trying to make decisions about the future? How do we get unstuck in processing and navigating some of our maybe emotional or mental or physical health things that we just, I don't want to live this way all of the time for the rest of my life. So how do I adjust? How do I get unstuck? How do I quit living the same pattern over and over and over and over again? How do I quit just pressing on the gas pedal but spinning the tires of my life in one spot? I want to have forward movement. And so today, in order to see that, we're going to build a little bit on what we did last week. And if you weren't with us last week, you're a guest today. Here's just the quick synopsis. What we really established last week through the story of God and humanity in the Scriptures is that when we have a stuck point, when we have a sin or a problem or an obstacle, it gets very easy to view God as being on the other side of that from us. And then we've got to work our way through the obstacle to a God who is waiting with a little bit of frustration and disappointment. That's how we often view it. When the reality is, the story of God all throughout humanity is that He is on the same side as us, wanting to work through things with us. When we surrender our lives to Him, we actually become one with Him, and so He's with us. So God is not over there somewhere waiting for you to work through the problem. God is with you, wanting to lead you through the problem. God is with you, wanting to guide and shape how you navigate the problem. He's wanting to provide His strength, His wisdom, His resource, which changes everything. If we can start in our stuckness to realize, wait a second, God has not abandoned me in this moment. He's not off in the distance somewhere frustrated with me. He's in it with me, wanting to help me out of it. He actually has entered the ditch with me, wanting to help me get unstuck, wanting to help us get unstuck. That changes everything for us. Now today, to kind of say, okay, now what do we do with that? Okay, if God is with us, what do we do? I want to invite you to go to the Old Testament of your Bible. The Old Testament of your Bible to the book of 2 Samuel. 2 Samuel is part of a collection of books just covering the history of Israel and how God led them, and honestly how they pushed against God sometimes and how God was trying to be gracious to them. And it's a history of some of their kings. Largely, one of those kings is a guy named King David. And we're going to look at just a few lines of King David's story in 2 Samuel chapter 11. And again, here's what you got to know about David. At this point in the story, David is a king. He is the king of Israel. So he's one of the most powerful people in the known world at the time. He has unlimited resource. He's had a lot of successes. He has had some setbacks and pain, but he has had a lot of successes. He has a lot of what people would look at and say positive momentum. Like, he's got a lot of positive momentum in success and in career path. I mean, things are going well for David, and that's honestly how God designed it. I mean, that God wanted to bless David. God set David up to be blessed and to have some forward movement. And in 2 Samuel chapter 11, we're going to jump into this point in the story. David is the king, and let's watch some really maybe shocking events that develop. Okay, 2 Samuel chapter 11, we're going to start reading in verse 1. It says, in the spring, at the time when kings, like David, go off to war, because that's when wars could be fought in the terrain. And okay, if nations were going to be in conflict, that was the time of year. And so kings would naturally go off to war with their people. Kings were leaders. They were commanders. They led armies, right? They built up armies. And so in the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David, he sent Joab, his commander, out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and they besieged Rahab. But David remained in Jerusalem. It seems like such a passing statement. It's absolutely crucial because David is doing something way outside the norm here. And David isn't really like cutting a new leadership trend here. Okay, David's actually just shirking some responsibility. David's laid it back a little bit. And because he's not where he is supposed to be, some other things develop. Verse 2, one evening, David got up from his bed and he walked around on the roof of the palace. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful, and David sent someone to find out about her. The man said, "She's Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite." Then David sent messengers to get her. She came to him, and he slept with her. David is this king, okay? David is this king who doesn't go to war when he historically would have gone to war. And while he's not at war when he historically would have gone to war, he sees a woman that he is not married to. In fact, she is married to somebody else, and he leverages his power and his authority to get her to the palace and commits adultery with her. David, this king, with all of this success, with all of the positive momentum, with all of the resource, with all, right? David, with an army that's winning battles, David suddenly makes a couple of decisions that get him stuck. David makes a couple of decisions that very quickly will alter the course of his emotional well-being, his spiritual well-being. They will alter the course of relationships of people around him. He gets stuck. But it's one thing to look and point at David and say, well, those were really, really bad decisions. And they were. Like, we're not going to prop them up. They were bad decisions. One is a really bad leadership decision, and one is just a bad decision of the heart and motive, right? I mean, they're both really bad decisions. But let's go a little further and talk about what's happening now. Let's go to the flip chart for a few minutes today, because I think it'll just be helpful for us to see this played out a little bit. We could maybe just make this great big circle out here, and we could just say, man, David in this moment, well, he's clearly committed this sin. It's always been God's standard to express his covenant through the gift of relationship. And so this clear exercise in relationship outside God's original design, it alters how people see God and how people view God expressed through him in a relationship. And so David committed adultery with Bathsheba. That's sin. David leveraging his power. That's sin, okay? So David's committed sin. You may or may not say him not going to war was a sin. Maybe. Again, at very least, it was a really bad leadership decision, which leaves him, if nothing else, if that one's not a sin, David's got a problem. You make enough of those decisions and you're going to have morale problems, you're going to have direction problems, you're going to have vision problems, you're going to have clarity problems, you're going to have lack of understanding problems. So David has some problems brewing here. These are the kind of things that can lead us to being stuck, because they're quickly the kind of things that can lead us to viewing God as on the other side of our issue. But it's one thing to look and say, man, David, Come on. Think. What are you doing? Right? But how did David get here, really? Really? Because it's probably more than just a bad decision. Because you ever make a decision, or you ever make a series of decisions, and you actually wonder, why in the world did I do that? Right? If you haven't, somebody's thought it about you, so it's okay. It's the same either way, okay? It's fine, right? Like, why did I spend that? Why did I go there? Why did I think that? Why did I do that? Why did I break that relationship, start that relationship? Why did I not break that relationship? I mean, right? We have these things, right? How did I get here? How did I find myself in this problem? Sometimes it's something that happened to me. Sometimes it's something I contributed to. And regardless of which one it was, we can often find ourselves stuck, and we wonder, how did I get in this ditch? Okay, I see the problem that happened. How did I get in this ditch? Well, there's something that's a little more core to David and a little more core to us. There's something that actually influences these decisions we make and how we process problems that come at us from our own doing or other people's doing. There's something else in us that contributes to our stuckness. And that is this reality that you and I both live life from our story. You have a story. You have a life story. Your story is comprised of hundreds of other little stories. Stories of your upbringing, stories of your parenting, stories of where you lived and cultures you lived in and experiences you had and how people favored you or how people disfavored you. Right? You have tons of stories. David, it's easy to jump into the middle of the story and say, David's a king. Get it together. Well, David's got a childhood that's marked at least on one really significant occasion of his dad actually forgetting about him. Like David knew what it was to be overlooked. David's the youngest of his siblings, and when a priest comes to anoint the next king and they go to David's family, David's dad doesn't even give David a second thought. He leaves him in the field, doesn't even bring him in so the priest could see him. The priest actually has to call for him. David's got, in part of his story, this story of being overlooked. When David was anointed to be the next king while there was still a king named Saul, so David's like the king in waiting, okay? Saul tries to kill him. Saul's so paranoid and threatened and intimidated by David. All of Saul's insecurities come out. He literally tries to kill David multiple times. I mean, I feel like I've had really hard things in my life sometimes. I've never had anybody trying to kill me for years of my life that I know of. Okay? But David did. I mean, David lived on the run. And listen to this. While David lived on the run, the only people for a while that would run with him were the people that the culture labeled the misfits. It's easy to look at David as the king and say, David, you have everything. But the challenge is that before David was king, David had a whole different story. And then when David is king, David has a whole new story. With being the king, there comes a new pressure. With being the leader, there comes a new weight of expectation. There becomes a new responsibility. David, as the king, carries the weight of an entire nation on his shoulders on some level. David carries the weight, the mantle of leadership. David has all these stories at play in here. And all of these stories, somewhere along the way, interact and shape how we respond to situations, how we respond to temptation. It's these stories, in some way, they are not the bailout for David. They're not the permission for David, but it's helpful to understand that if we ever want to change this pattern of stuckness, if we ever want to change this, we have to understand first why we're doing what we're doing. Why are we responding the way we are responding? Why do I keep spending like that? Why do I so often find myself bored? Why was I one day enlivened and had vitality around God and things of God, and now I don't? And I kind of want that again, but now I'm stuck. Why is it that I continue to make relationship decisions that violate my marriage? Why is it that I continue to shortchange my future? Why is it that I continue to be trapped by what other people think? Why is it that I continue to think that I deserve everything? Why is it that I think I have the answer to everything? Why is it that I continue to break relationships because I think I have the answer to everything? Why is it? Why am I here? And so, on some level, why we're here, just like David in 2 Samuel 11, it's because we have a story. We got to understand the story. You are not making decisions in a vacuum. You got a story. And your story has good and it has bad. It has losses and it has wins. It has hurts and it has praises and it has healings. It has a perfect combination of chaos. Just like David. I mean, you can understand David's mixed up, right? He's overlooked, he's passed by, he's threatened to be killed, he's got a king, he's got all this leadership, right? I've been super open with you in my story in times past. I mean, so many of the factors in my story, and you wire those together with personality and makeup and everything. I mean, I've lived inside of this story oftentimes with really significant insecurities that have led to me getting stuck in certain pockets of my life because that insecurity can make me think, well, I need that, or I need that approval, or I want that, or I don't, I'm never really going to deserve that, so I guess I just have to go get that, or I'm never really going to be that, so I guess I have to go prove that, okay? And it ends up shaping all of this. And out here, listen, I just want to give you a lot of permission. Out here, disciplines and habits are really good. Disciplines and habits to try and break this cycle are really good. They're not enough. They're not enough. Disciplines, habits, willpower, New Year's resolutions, they're all really good. They're not enough. They're tools. They're not the answer. Somehow we have to get to this point. Because here's what happens. You can start asking yourself these questions today. Why do I think the way I think? Why do I actually respond the way I do? Why is it that when I don't want to be angry anymore, I still am angry? Why is it when I don't want to lose my cool anymore, I still do? Why is it when I don't want to compromise on this issue of what I label morality or what I label God honoring? Why is it that I compromise in that? Why do I? You just start asking. Not, oh, I can't believe I did that, but why did I do it? And it helps to navigate this with somebody. It helps to navigate it with a counselor. It helps to navigate it with somebody you trust, somebody who's known you a while, somebody who can feel safe, right? It just, what's happening here? Because, listen, here's what I want to play out for us. When we are tempted, or when we are pushed, I want to tell you that you're tempted in your story. David stood as king on a palace, and he thought he had a right to stay back when he probably should have gone. And David had some internal thing, and maybe it's still his past of being overlooked and forgotten and think he has to prove himself. Maybe it's his current of all these successes and wins, and he thinks he deserves something. And whatever reason or combination it is, he thinks he gets to demand that he could get Bathsheba brought to the house. And all of a sudden, David's story is influencing a decision that's going to lead to him being stuck. So let's just talk about this piece of how temptation hits us in our story. And I wanted to show you the pattern of temptation for sin, but also how we navigate it with just problems, things that aren't sin. Okay, there's a pattern, and it's predictable. Again, the enemy is not creative. He's just crafty. He doesn't really have that many different plans of attack. So let me just show you the pattern. This is part of what David experienced. It's part of what we experience, okay? First, there is this thing that we could call temptation. And it might be temptation to sin like it was for David. Or it might just be temptation to make a bad decision that maybe isn't sin, maybe like David staying back. Maybe it's just a temptation to process something differently. Maybe it's this temptation to not respond quite like we would want to maybe look at the glass half empty and instead of half full, right? It's this temptation. And we don't like what's happening out here. And so when temptation comes, whether it's the temptation to sin or something else, there is this natural element where we resist. We expend our energy resisting. We're going to resist the sin, or we're going to resist the temptation, or we're going to say no, or we're going to resist thinking like that. And that's a great deal for a while. There is a challenge with resisting, though, and resisting alone. Eventually, that resistance gives way. There's only so long you can hold out. And here's the problem. Temptation comes, and temptation makes a promise. Temptation makes a promise to offer you some level of fulfillment. Temptation promises to bring you some degree of happiness. And you want to know the truth? You want to know the truth? It does. When resisting runs out and we make a decision or engage in an act that we for a while were resisting, temptation does keep its promise, and there is pleasure in the act. There is pleasure in the moment. And honestly, the longer you resist and the longer you fight, the greater the pleasure when you give in. I mean, let's just play this out. You got a spending addiction, and you resist and you resist and you resist and you resist. You don't spend anything for 3 months. Man, the next time you swipe that card. Right? Come on. Don't elbow anybody next to you. Listen, just leave them alone. Okay? But it's just true, right? Man. You're inside of a relationship. Maybe it's sibling, maybe it's parent-child, maybe it's husband and wife, whatever it is, dating, whatever. And you're like, okay, I'm not going to lose my temper anymore. Man, I love that person. I'm not going to lose my temper. 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 I'm not going to lose my, but then when you do finally lose, come on, just own it. Just don't sit there all pious. Give me a break. Look, it feels good for a minute, doesn't it? You just let that thing rip and you just let everything out. And for a while, you've just been resisting. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. And you might have just for a fraction of a second worked some things out, but I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. And then when you do, there's this moment of pleasure. Now here's the thing. So the temptation actually fulfills its promise, but it's remarkably temporary. Because quickly on the other side of that promise is we've actually dug the rut a little deeper. We've put our foot on the gas, but we're still in the same rut. And so we start to understand that, okay, maybe my resistance might wear down somewhere, right? What would I actually do if that were to give way on me? I mean, David somewhere probably resisted for a little bit, right? I mean, David somewhere probably said, I don't want to do this. So before often we actually even commit the sin or engage in the problem or take the wrong perspective, we get into what we might call sin or problem management. And what we're going to do here is we're going to manage consequences. We're going to predict what the consequences of our action will be, and we will figure out how to manage those. Come on, we got to have a heart-to-heart here for a second, okay? Here's how we do this. We actually start crafting our apologies. Before we've done anything, we start crafting apologies. We start shaping our way out. We start shaping how we'll deal with the potential outfall or the potential heartache we even cause ourselves. Listen, sometimes we even start rehearsing our prayers. What will my confession prayer? Okay, if I do this has been my confession prayer in the past, and I don't really want to have to pray that prayer again, but look, I'm not going to resist forever, and so I got to think this thing, right? We just start managing the consequences. And again, it's understandable why we do it. Again, David, if we follow the rest of David's story, that's part of what David tries to do for a while. Eventually, that runs its course a little bit, and so then somewhere along the way, we just got to blame other people. We just have to blame everybody else. It's your fault I lost my cool. It's your fault I struggle with insecurity. It's your fault that I don't feel like my needs are met. It's your fault that I didn't get what I wanted. It's your fault that I have to carry all of this burden of this weight. And maybe David, it's like, hey, it's your fault, Israel, that I got to feel the weight of this leadership thing. It's your fault. We blame other people. I mean, that's as old as time, right? That's Adam and Eve in the garden. She made me do it. Okay, I mean, that, right? We blame others. That's just part of it. It just gets easy to blame others for our stuckness. I can't be healthy because this. Listen, sometimes we're not even blaming other individuals. We're blaming other systems. We're blaming society. I can't get healthy because of how bad the world is. I can't have hope because of how bad things are, right? That's all this is. It's just blaming others. It's part of the pattern of how temptation gets moving in us and pushing through us. And then we're just left with a couple options. I mean, we can live with shame, or we can just settle. And we say, this stuckness, that's my life. That's as good as it's going to be. Our marriage, this is as good as it's ever going to be. My relationship with God, this is as good as it's ever be. My mental, emotional health, this is as good as it's ever going to be. The way I spend my money, this is as good as it's ever going to be. I'm always going to do this. I'm always going to be a worrier. I'm always going to be a procrastinator. I'm always going to have broken relationships. I'm always going to, right? Other people are always going to hurt me, right? We settle. We settle. If you went back to the story of David, and if we read a little more, part of what we would see is that David went through some of that, right? He does sin. There's some consequence built in, right? He even has Uriah, Bathsheba's husband. He has him killed. He's trying to manage consequences. Like, you talk about misusing your power a couple times in a row. Not good, David, but he does. Okay? And then there's all sorts of guilt and anguish and grief that takes place. It's just part of the pattern and the way it works. And so the question then becomes, what in the world do I do with that? Even if I could figure out my story, what do I do with this pattern? Because this is the pattern that we have to break. This is the pattern we have to have. And look, sometimes this pattern, it takes place over weeks in our mind. We're just playing over weeks. Sometimes we run through this pattern in 15 or 20 seconds. It's so deeply ingrained. It's so common. But if we want to get unstuck, we got to just pull back and we got to look and we got to see it. Whatever I'm in, I am being tempted to live this pattern. The way out of my marriage trouble, the way out of my spending habit, the way out of my worries, resist. When I realize I can't resist, then the thing is, okay, how am I going to manage this? And how are we going to manage the outfall of this? And maybe we can just regroup and kind of get back to where we were, and maybe that'll be it. And really, it's their fault anyway, and it's not my fault. So, right, it just gets, it's the pattern. It's the pattern. So what in the world do we do with it? There's this guy named Paul, New Testament Bible, Romans chapter 7. Towards the end of Romans chapter 7, Paul has just been pouring out his heart to this group of people saying, look, part of my challenge in life is I do all these things I don't want to do. And all these things that I want to do, I don't do those. Paul's like, look, I keep living here, and I don't want to, but I keep living here. And this other life that I want to live, well, I don't seem to be able to do that either, right? Like, what am I going to do, right? And I just love that because I think it's one of the most relatable parts of all the Bible, right? I'm doing all this junk I don't want to do, and all the good I want to do I don't really do, right? We relate, we get that. We all understand that. And Paul owns it real honestly in Romans chapter 7. And then he says, what in the world am I going to do? And he says, oh man, at the end of the day, praise God. Because through God's Son, Jesus, there's a way out of this. Because through God's Son, Jesus, there is a way to break this pattern. I don't have to live this way. The strength is actually in the person of Jesus. And then he goes down in Romans chapter 8 to talk all about the power of the gospel and the power of a resurrection and the power of the same Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead living in you. So what do I do to experience that? There's a couple moves. They're more simple but more profound than you might think. Let me just give you a couple moves. The first one, I'm going to give them to you in two parts. The first one, if you want to break out of this thing a little bit, you got to tell God. You got to have an honest conversation with God. Listen, every prayer, I'm all about ask to be forgiven. Every prayer cannot be an apology. Some prayer needs to be an honest outpouring to God. I hate what I am in. I hate that I am stuck here. I hate that we are stuck here. I hate that this world, God, I'm being very honest and candid. God, I'm not much different than Paul. The thing I want to do, I'm not doing, and it is angering to me, and it is frustrating to me. God, I desperately need your help. And when we tell God, and the conversation is candid, we give ourselves an opportunity to experience the grace of God, not just the forgiveness, but his power to bring transformation to us. We tell God. Then the second thing is this. We got to tell another. There's going to be a point in time where we have to tell another. We got to tell another person. We got to share it with somebody else. We've got to put it in the light. We've got to let it be. It's not just me and God. It's me and God and the right person or people he has brought to my life. David hedges on that for a while until eventually God sends him another. God has a prophet named Nathan show up and just call him on it. David, you're way too valuable here. Listen, this is what you've done, okay? But then David had to receive it, because when you tell another, then you can receive the grace of another, the power of community. Tell God and tell another so you can receive the grace of God and the grace of another. Tell God and tell another. And look, let it be a little raw. Let it be honest. Let it be forthcoming. Let it be unhindered. Let it be unperfected. Let it be rough around the edges. Let it be candid. Let it be the kind of discussion that is honest about our weaknesses, that is honest about our shortcomings. Tell God and tell another. And here's why this is so important. Listen, here's why this is so important. Because when we do this and we experience this thing of grace, here's the power of grace. Grace does more than just heal this sin or forgive this sin, right? Grace brings healing to a story. Grace is not just the removal of sin. Grace actually is a power. It's a dynamic power that brings a power. It brings a God-given power that is beyond us. Grace is more than just forgiveness of sin. It's the power to heal in a story. It brings healing to your story. When we tell God and we tell another, we're opening ourselves up to grace, not just grace with an outward consequence or thing, but grace for healing in our story. That's why we got to tell. That's why we got to tell. So that we can receive grace to see the story and to experience healing in the story. Some of us, the best thing we're going to do today is start by just telling God so that we can receive grace. Yeah, it's the forgiveness and removal of whatever, but it's the healing to our story. It's the healing that comes to our story. And it's the beginning. It's the beginning. Several years ago, I don't even remember how I did this, but I cut my finger. It was like my middle finger, and I cut it right on the edge, like below the fingernail. And I didn't think much of it at the time. It bled a lot or whatever, and it's kind of a deep cut. I can't remember how I do it. And I was going through Band-Aids. You know, sometimes you just keep going through the Band-Aids, and then it's in a rough spot. So every time you put your hand in your pocket or you touch something, you got to write something. It's like, there it is again, there it is again, there it is again. And I kept going through Band-Aids. And then eventually, once it had stopped bleeding, like a couple days later, because I keep kind of scraping it, whatever, I still have these Band-Aids on. But I realized, man, this thing isn't bleeding anymore, but man, it's sore. That's weird. I've never really had a cut like hurt like this. This is really weird. And I don't think much of it, but then a little bit later, it's more and more sore. It's more and more sore. And then I realized it's actually starting to swell, and it's this really weird mix of red and purple, right? And so then I start leaving Band-Aids on more for the little padding that the Band-Aid provides, right? And a little soft spot. I'm like, this is not good, right? So eventually it hurts so bad, like I'm barely able to brush everything. It just hurts. I'm like, I guess I'm going to go to a doctor. Like, let me go figure this thing out, right? Like I clearly need more than a Band-Aid. And you know, like I go, and you know the deal, right? Somehow, even though I'd done all the little right things, I'd put the Band-Aid on it, I'd even put the little magical Neosporin on the little cut, but somehow that thing had gotten infected. Man, it hurt. And man, it hurt. And the doctor said, look, I can cut it open and get rid of that right now, or I can give you an antibiotic. Give me the antibiotic, doc. Keep your scalpel in your drawer, friend. Okay? But I needed something that was more than a Band-Aid could do. The Band-Aid was good for out here. I needed something that could get internal. I needed something that could get to the core. Friends, listen. We need more than a Band-Aid for the things that we're stuck in. You need more than a 1, 2, 3-step solution. You need more than a way to minimize the problem that you're in. You need a grace that can get into your story and actually bring healing to your story. You need the grace and power of God that would not just remove something, but that would change the direction, that would actually pull you out of the ditch and put you back on the road. Grace absolutely contains forgiveness, but grace is a power. And it's a power to heal and transform. See, here's what I know, because I've lived here plenty myself. Here's what I know, is that you don't really want to settle. Listen to me. Look at me for a minute. You don't really want to settle. You know that. I'm not telling you that you don't want to settle. And where you've already settled, you wish you hadn't. You don't want to live trying to dig yourself out of the ditch for the rest of your life and on your own. You're already tired. You're already frustrated by it. Maybe you've been in it so long you've already turned off your emotions to it so you don't feel the tiredness and you don't feel the frustration. Maybe you've just grown tired of hurting somebody around you with the thing you're stuck in. You're tired of having to try and explain it. You're tired of them trying to always navigate it and walk on eggshells around it. You're tired. You're just tired of that. I just want to invite you today to take the first step and just tell God, so that you can receive grace from God. To have a very raw conversation. Because here's one thing I can promise you, that God's response to the conversation will be an expression of his goodness. It will be an expression of his kindness. It will be an expression of his strength. It will be an expression of his healing. And it's okay to admit that you need some of that. It's okay. You're not the first person to be stuck, and you won't be the last. So I want to do for just a minute, I want to just invite you to bow your heads, close your eyes, just in the quietness of a moment. We're going to let a moment happen with God. And I'm not going to say anything a little bit. You just there in your seat. Go ahead and tell God. Have an honest, raw conversation about where you're stuck and what it feels like and what it is. Tell him what you know and tell him what you don't know. Tell him what you think you need and what you're not sure you need. Jesus, I wouldn't even want to pretend to know all the ways that right now you're meeting with people in seats. And you're meeting people on their couch, or around their kitchen table, in their home. I know some of it's like dramatic expressions of your compassion or infusions of hope, assurances of your love. Some people, you've probably literally picked them up and let them experience you holding them, you being 100% of the strength. Thank you, Jesus, for how you have put the light brightly on the scheme of an enemy that would love to keep us stuck. Today we're just people who receive your grace. We receive your power to begin experiencing your healing. We receive your grace to meet us at the core, not just in the externals, but to meet us at our core, the most raw, bruised, nicked, tired, frustrated parts of us. Parts maybe that we're embarrassed of or ashamed of or unsure how to process, scared to admit. Thanks for meeting with us right there. Thank you for bringing the power of your grace there. Grateful for it. Here in the room, I just want to invite you to stand. Just quietly, prayerfully stand. We're going to end just a little bit differently today. Lori, come on out here. I just want to give you a blessing. We're just going to leave a little prayerfully today. We're going to let Miranda keep playing for us for a couple minutes. And here's the thing, as we go, one of the best things you could do today is Lori's here, and I'm just going to jump down front with Lori, and would you just give us a chance to just pray a simple prayer of grace over you, just to speak a word of grace over you. It won't be a long prayer. It won't be let us just speak a word of grace over you. In some ways, it'll be the beginning of telling another. So you receive the grace of God and the grace of another. If you're joining online, you say, man, I just wish that could be me. Just type the word grace somewhere in the chat. Just like last week, all of you who typed the word prayer, it was our thrill to pray for you. Just type the word grace. We're just going to pray a prayer of grace for you. The power of God to begin a healing. Let me bless you. And we'll just leave prayerfully again. Lori and I are here. Love a chance to speak a word of grace over you. May you go today with your heart full of permission to just go ahead and tell God and tell another. May just the realness and the rawness, the authenticity that comes with that, may that be part of what's contagious in your life as you are sent in the power of the Spirit into this week. In Jesus' name. Amen. We just leave again a little prayerfully, a little quietly. Come on down here too. Let us just speak a word of grace.